I believe all of the licensing committee members are here.
We're actually waiting for Justin. He's having some internet issues, so hopefully in a few minutes I'll let you know. So
Okay.
Thank you.
And this is the moderator, board member Justin Huft. Huft is with us now. Justin, would you like to do a mic and camera check?
Hi, yes, testing.
Yes,
Testing.
wonderful. We can
Thank
hear
you.
you. Thank you so much. And we can see you. Thanks.
Okay. Steve, are we good to start?
I believe we're waiting. Roseanne needs to be let into the meeting, but we should be good to start to get going. We're all here.
Okay. We can get started with all the introductions and stuff. Okay. Well, good morning. Welcome to the October 27th, 2023 Licensing Committee meeting. My name is Wendy Strack, chair of the committee. Before we start, I'd like to remind everyone present that the board is a consumer protection agency charged with administering and enforcing the board's laws. Where protection of the public is inconsistent with other interests sought to be promoted, the protection of the public shall be paramount. I will announce when we're accepting public comment on the various issues, and the meeting moderator will open the lines as appropriate. Each commenter will have 2 minutes to comment. Moderator, would you please provide the audience instructions on how they may participate during the meeting at the appropriate times?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before we get started, I would like to remind committee members and senior staff who are not speaking to mute their microphone. If I detect background noise during the meeting as a result of unmuted microphones, I will interject with a brief friendly reminder or simply mute microphones. To facilitate public comment, we will be utilizing the WebEx question and answer feature, also referred to as the Q&A panel. When the chair reaches a point in the agenda at which public comment is appropriate, public comment will be requested. At the chair's direction, I will turn on and announce the opening of the Q&A feature. It is not necessary to identify yourself in order to make a public comment. I will take comments in the order they are received. I will give the member of the public the ability to unmute themselves. The member of the public will have 2 minutes to make their comments. I will provide a 15-second warning, and at the conclusion, the microphone will be muted and we will move on to the next member of the public who has a comment. Please note that the Q&A feature is being used only as a means for members of the public to represent that they would like to make a verbal comment. Once given permission to unmute, the member of the public may unmute themselves and verbally state their comment. The Q&A feature is not to be used for typing out questions or for committee members to communicate with one another. And with that, I return the floor back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, moderator. I would now like to call the meeting to order and ask Christina to call the roll and establish a quorum.
Good morning. Dr. Annette Walker.
Good morning, present.
Justin Huff.
Present, LMFT member.
Eleanor Uribe.
Good morning, present.
Wendy Strack.
Good morning, present and public member.
We have a quorum, and I'd like to remind all committee members to keep your cameras on for the duration of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Board staff, would you like to introduce yourselves as well?
Yes, I'll start. I'm Steve Sodergren, the executive officer of the board.
And good morning, everyone. I'm Marlon McManus. I'm the assistant executive officer for the BBS.
And good morning, Roseanne Helms. I'm the legislative manager for the board.
I'm Christina Kitamura. I'm the administrative analyst for the board.
Sabina Knight, legal counsel for the board.
I think is that everybody?
Yes.
All right, now it's a time for the public to introduce themselves if they would like. This is voluntary Is there anyone in the audience that would like to introduce themselves? And I'll turn it over to the moderator here.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll go ahead and open up the Q&A panel so that members of the public may indicate that they would like to introduce themselves, or so you can just type comment in the field in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, or you may raise your hand if you'd like to introduce yourself. We'll give you a moment. All right, and I see we have a Ben Caldwell that would like to introduce himself. Ben, you should see a prompt to unmute yourself. There you go, you're unmuted.
Okay.
Oh, let me try that one more time. It looks like he had some difficulty. Ben, would you like to unmute or introduce yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry, that was it. If you can hear me okay. Ben Caldwell, MFT.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Thank you so much. And now we have Adrian Schulten. And Adrian, if you see a prompt to unmute, go ahead and click on it.
This is Adrian Schulten with the California Alliance of Child and Family Services. Thank you.
Thank you. And next, we have Marika Collins. Marika, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Director of Public Policy at Didi Hirsch Mental Health Services and a proud MSW.
Thank you, Marika. All right, and next we have Paige Clark.
With the California Alliance of Child and Family Services.
Thank you, Paige. All right, I see no further requests for introductions. Shall I go ahead and close the Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, before we get to the consent calendar, I did want to let everyone know we will be switching the order of items 7 and 8. We'll take item 7 right after we hear item 6, and then we will move to item 7 after that. Our first agenda item is discussion and possible approval of January 13th, 2023 and July 21st, 2023 committee meeting minutes. Does any member wish to remove or edit any items from the consent calendar?
Before we do that, I just want to say we're going to remove the January 13th meeting minutes because those were actually approved in July. So we're only going to be approving one set, and that would be July 21st, 2023.
Thank you, Christina. Does any member wish to remove or edit the July 21st, 2023 committee meeting minutes? Okay. Do we have a motion on the consent calendar?
Yes, Dr. Walker would like to make the motion.
Thank you.
Good item. Thank you. This is Sabina. If I could interrupt real quick, I would love it if the motion included the date and what we are approving.
Thank you, Sabina.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Dr. Walker, I'd like to make a motion to approve item 3B, discussion of possible approval of July 21st, 2023 committee meeting minutes.
Thank you.
You got it.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that. This is Eleanor Uribe.
And then do we have any comments from the public?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am opening up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to comment on this agenda item, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, or you may simply raise your hand. We are displaying instructions and we'll give you a moment. All right, I see no request for comment. Shall I close the question and answer panel?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Right. Christina, please take the vote.
Justin Huff,
Abstain?
Wendy Stratt,
Yes.
Eleanor Uribe.
Yes.
I'm sorry, is that a yes? I didn't hear.
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Annette Walker,
Yes.
motion carries.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is the overview of the purpose of the committee. Roseanne, would you like to provide us the overview?
Yes, thanks, Wendy. So the board has formed the special licensing committee to conduct in-depth discussions about numerous topics related to the licensing process. And so the last time this committee met was on July 21st, 2023. And at that meeting, the committee reviewed a draft consumer outreach document to clearly define the professions on which discussion will continue today. And it also discussed its workforce development action plan, including short-term and long-term goals. And then based on our past discussions on this committee, as well as items in our strategic plan for the board, there is a list of potential topics for the discussion that we will be tackling at upcoming meetings as of this committee that is shown in the memo for this item. Thanks.
Thank you, Roseanne. Any committee members have any comments or questions on the item? Okay. Seeing none, does the public have any comments?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm opening up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to make a comment, please either raise your hand or type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. We will give you a moment. All right, I see no request for comment at this time. Shall I close the question and answer panel?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you, Roseanne, for your update on that one. Next on the agenda is discussion and possible recommendation to change the name of the committee to Workforce Development. And Steve, I think you are presenting this one.
Yes, that's me. Thank you, Wendy. So as you can, just with Roseanne's overview of the actual committee of the stuff that we've done so far and what we're looking for moving forward, it really appeared to us that really what is going to guide the agendas for the upcoming committee meetings is really all concerned with the workforce development, looking at those short-term and long-term goals that we had set in the workforce development plan, which means, looking at data to determine where there might be unnecessary barriers and where they exist, looking at ways, having discussions about ways that we could actually assist in reducing those barriers, taking a good look too at just our licensing pathway and exploring that more to ensure that we're not really blocking people from getting into the profession unnecessarily. So what we were suggesting is, instead of calling this the licensing committee, is really just calling it the Workforce Development Committee. And so I'm asking the committee members to give us the okay to do that. And if that would be okay.
Thank you, Steve. Seems to me like this is really more reflective of the work that we're doing now at this point in the committee sort of evolution. So this seems like a great idea to me, but I will check in with the fellow committee members. Dr. Walker, I believe you have your hand up. Oh, you are muted, I think. We can't hear you.
You're absolutely right. Sorry about that. I was just saying that I agree with you, Madam Chair, with your with your word choice there, and also appreciate Steve bringing this forward to the board at this. I think it's just a prime time to do so. My only thought or comment would be, would we want to tweak the description a little bit? Because Steve, what you just said was so, I think, beneficial for the scope of the work that we'll be doing. So do we also maybe want to add a little bit of that in what Roseanne just presented to us?
Yeah, I can see we could do that, I'm sure.
If the board members agree. It's just a suggestion, yeah.
That sounds great. Thank you for those comments. Any other committee members with feedback on this item? All righty. Let's see. Are there any comments from the public? We'll go to the public for now.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll open up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public has a comment, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, or simply raise your hand. We'll give you a moment. All right, I see no request for comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Would anyone like to make a motion?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion to accept staff's recommendation to change the name of the committee to Workforce Development. And this is Public Board Member Dr. Annette Walker making that motion. I would also add that with that motion, we would bring language to adopt or to add the scope of the work that Steve just mentioned.
This is Sabina. If I could interrupt real quick. This motion would just be the name of the committee. I know staff will rework the description of the committee based on the discussion. So right now, let's keep our motion to the agenda item, and then the board staff will bring back something at the next meeting for you to consider about the description.
Okay, may I ask why is it necessary to bring it back in that manner?
If you're asking that the board take action on the description, then it would probably have to come back to the committee like that.
Because it's not an agenda item per se, something that we vote on?
Correct. Correct. It's just the name is on the agenda item instead of the description or anything else.
Okay, that's important distinction to make. Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
And I'll jump in here too. Yeah, we will definitely in the overview memo, we will change this description of the purpose of the committee to match the new sort of direction of the workforce development committee.
Okay, great. So Sabina, should I make that a suggestion for a future agenda item later, or are we just, is it okay to do that?
Actually, can I, there's a motion on the memo, and maybe that motion, the way it's written might already kind of include any work like that. The motion would be to direct staff to complete any necessary actions to change the name of the committee.
Perfect. So let's amend that motion, Dr. Walker, and then we'll be okay.
Okay, so now I'm confused. Love what you just said, Christina. So it sounds like it's already there.
It's in the memo.
So in making the motion.
So on page 1 of item, the materials for item 5, there at the end, it says recommendation. It says direct staff to complete any necessary actions to change the name of the committee. We'll just add that to your motion. So your motion would then be, I motion that we change the name of the committee to Workforce Development and direct staff to complete any necessary actions to change the name of the committee. Just kind of add that second sentence onto your motion.
Okay, sounds like I think we're right back to where we started. And so, Public Board Member Dr. Annette Walker, I'd like to make a motion on agenda item number 5 to approve staff's recommendation for discussion and recommendation to change the name of the committee to Workforce Development, including board action to update the text of the description of the committees. Is that close enough?
What about complete any necessary actions to change the name?
Okay. And to complete any necessary action to change the name.
Yeah.
There you go. Right. Just on page 1 of the memo. Great work.
Thank you.
All right. Do we have a second on that?
I will second that, Mrs. Uribe.
Thank you. Any comments regarding the motion now that we all think we understand? All right. Are there any comments from the audience, from the public regarding the motion?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm opening up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to comment, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, or simply raise your hand. I do see we have some requests for comment already. So one moment while I go through my list. It looks like Ben is first. Hold on a moment, Ben. All right, Ben, you should be able to unmute.
Thank you. Good morning. Ben Caldwell, MFT. And just a quick note of agreement and support. As Steve, Chair Strack, and Ms. Walker all said, this seems to better capture the scope of the committee's work. And I think that's useful for stakeholders and others who may be interested in the work of the committee. So thank you.
Hello, Rebecca Gonzalez with the National Association of Social Workers, California chapter. I just wanted to agree with the change in the name because, as we all know, we're facing a workforce crisis right now, and this is what the board really needs to be focusing on. So just want to concur. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. And we have Adrienne Shilton. Adrienne, you should be able to unmute.
Good morning, Adrienne Shilton with the California Alliance. Also want to support the name change. Thank you.
And next we have Marika Collins.
Yes, I just wanted to chime in ever so briefly just to echo my support for the name change. As a community-based organization in the field trying to serve our clients, this is the by far the #1 issue, workforce. So your focus on this issue is really appreciated. Thank you.
All right, I see no further requests for comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, with that, Christina, please take the vote.
Justin Hubt,
Yes.
Wendy Strack,
Yes.
Eleanor Uribe,
Yes.
Dr. Annette Walker.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Great. Next on the agenda is discussion regarding the development of a consumer outreach document defining the board's professions. Roseanne, would you provide us with the overview?
Yes, thanks, Wendy. So previous meetings, the committee had discussed creating an outreach document designed to help consumers better understand the types of mental health professionals available to them. And that's because currently on our website, we define the professions as it relates, as we regulate define the preference we regulate using the scopes of practice that are defined in statute. And that's probably helpful information for licensees, but it's not really something that consumers may be really able to relate to if they're looking for a specific mental health professional. So the board determined that the outreach document could focus on the 4 professions that the board licenses. It should be used it could be used on the board's website and social media, and also as outreach by other agencies if they choose to. So the committee directed staff to work with the board's professional association stakeholder groups to develop a comprehensive overview of each profession. And so we asked each professional association to provide a description of the profession they represent, including a description of the profession, examples of clients they commonly see, examples of common work settings, and education level. And so I'd like to thank each of our 4 professional associations. They did a great job of being responsive to this request and providing great overviews of their profession. So thank you very much to the four of you. Attachment A shows the draft document that we've put together. We refined it slightly from the last meeting. We had some feedback at the last meeting that we wanted to focus more with social work on clinical social work rather than focusing on both clinical and non-clinical social work. So we've made some refinements on that. And so the document is shown in attachment A for your review and discussion. And if you are in agreement with the document today, if you feel comfortable with it, what we'd like to do is to post it on our website. Thanks.
Thank you, Roseanne. Do we have any comments from board members? Looking around.
This is Eleanor Uribe.
Okay. Yes, Eleanor, go ahead.
So I like the information. I was just going to ask if we could make it more kind of universal. So maybe an example might be, so it says the LMFTs, and then usually like you put the parentheses, it says licensed family therapist, and I would just say put the parenthesis right after. So it could be similar format. I mean, it's not like a big thing as long as, the other people, everybody is in agreement. And then kind of having the basic tenets. So, making sure everything, usually when you write, you would kind of do the parentheses right after, and then I know it says at the very bottom, like scope. So just, maybe just kind of similar format for each one. And I think it might be a little bit easier to read. And so an example might be with licensed clinical social workers. It says it up on the top, but, maybe kind of just do similar format. And then what do they do? Let's see. Do you understand what I'm saying? So it might have it in the top with parentheses, and then they have it on the bottom. So, I would just say, if you're going to do that, do that for all of them.
You're kind of looking for like different, like a formatting to make it easier to read. Is kind of, I think, what you're looking for.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm not sure I exactly understand what you're saying. We have the 4 bullets and then we have a couple of paragraphs for each one. So could you maybe elaborate more what other headings you're looking for?
Oh, so I think they basically have similar information. So I'm just kind of saying, put them in similar format. So an example might be you have licensed marriage and family therapist, and then it has an LMFT. But then right after it says, it goes into explaining what it is. But I would almost say, just kind of have the format that they would all kind of say similar. So I think LMFTs here, I'm sorry, I'm reading off a really small thing. So maybe if you compare the two, like an LCSW or LMFT, one might start telling LMFTs do this or LCSWs do that. But I would just say LCSWs go into, there are 2 types of LCSWs. I think, like I said, it's just more of a format. Just put them similar, because I know each field kind of took it on their own. But I'm just saying, take like say the introduction, who is this, and then what do they do, and just put it in similar format as with each other. And if you can help out on that, Steve.
I think
so an example. Go ahead.
It's kind of like LC, and for each one, you want to state, first of all, who they are and make sure that's kind of in one point. And then, what they do. I think I know what you're saying. It's kind of making it to, it's almost what in my mind looking at, almost could do a matrix to say who, what, how, and you could have, and making sure they, I understand. I think formatted.
I think I understand what you mean. We can take a look at that.
So we have certain chunks that are identified in each one that we can say, oh, this says who up here, it should be who down here. What is it, or what they do. Okay.
so the basic information for each is there. So say they're asking for 4 things. So each one would touch base on what those 4 things are. And then also the structure. So they would all have, like, say the name, say the acronym, you know, the LCSW, LMFT, because like, I think even in the little write-up, because one might have the little acronym, the other one might not. So just kind of have that, you know, similar.
Okay, staff, do you have what you need for that, Roseanne?
Yeah, we can take a look at that and restructure it a little.
Okay. And then I think we have Justin Huff, Board Member Huff.
Yeah, we're talking about item 6, right? I think I lost the thread because all of them are identical to one another. The format is exactly the same for all of them. It's the title, parentheses, or the abbreviation, and then they contain the same information for every single one, which is what it is, who they serve, where they work, what the educational qualifications are. So I think I maybe lost the thread of what we're asking for in terms of change, because what I'm hearing is they should be identical, but what I'm reading is that they are.
I'm thinking maybe what's being said is kind of they are you know, they are showing similar information, but maybe highlighting it better so that you could. Go ahead, Roseanne. Did you?
It's going to be difficult to get them exactly the same because each profession is a little different. We might be able to work out a little bit of the nuances, but there is a little bit of a nuance between each profession. So it's a little bit, we tried to get it as close as possible. But it's just up to, I mean, it's up to you. If you feel that the document reads well, we can go forward, or we can try to fix a little bit of the nuances so they're a little more consistent. That's the board's call.
I'd like to motion to approve this.
Okay.
This is Sabina. Sorry to interrupt. This item is not agendized for a motion. I think it's just kind of a working item right now. And so I think the staff is taking some great notes, and we'll come back and rework the document.
Well, I think the discussion is, do we want to rework it or do we want to just post it?
Or that.
Maybe it would help if we could, I guess, understand Board Member Uribe's comments. Is what's kind of, I think the beginning of the LCSW one is different than the rest. Is that what's kind of throwing off your reading of it? Is that like,
yes,
what exactly is drawing you out?
Yeah, I think it's a good document. I think it looks a little bit more professional if we just kind of put, you know, like say for instance, okay, LMFT is a licensed marriage family therapist, commonly referred to as LMFT. I don't know. I mean, you can say that, but I don't know if that's necessary, or you can leave it and then, or basically saying, hey, an licensed marriage family therapist is a licensed marriage health provider. Just maybe going into that, or maybe with the LCSW is there are 2 types. Oh, let me see that. I mean, just kind of having the same. If you want to say, hey. I don't know if that LMFT is necessary, because I mean, unless you want to say LCSW is considered that. So maybe saying this is the name, this is the acronym, this is what they do, this is how they're qualified. So almost just having those basic, it's just very little that needs, but I feel like that little might help it read a little bit better. So kind of similar, licensed professional clinical counselors provide care. So maybe just say, LCSWs provide blah, LMFTs do this, LPCCs do this. So almost just that same format, and then putting that little parentheses. I think it's just very minimal, but I think it'll read a little bit better. And like I said, I just feel like it'll look a little bit more professional, not just not to take away from anything, but just a little bit of reworking to combine them all together and, so that everything's clear. You expect this is what they do, this is what the acronym is, this is what the education is, and then this is our scope.
Yeah, it's a little bit, because of the social workers, we wanted to touch on the fact that there's two, because this is a document for the public, we want to have the acronyms in there a couple of times because they may not be familiar with the actual, what is an LMFT and why do we keep referring to that? The social workers, we kind of went back and forth a little bit with that because it's a little bit more nuanced than for other because social workers have master social workers that are not necessarily licensed. So we wanted to at least mention that and explain to the public, which is why theirs is a little bit different. And then we go into, here's what the scope is, here's what they do, kind of like the others. So I don't know that we necessarily want to get rid of that piece for social workers, even though it is a little bit different. I think that it gets the point across, but we want to at least mention that there's two types because a lot of the public, I think, isn't aware that there's two types and one of them is unlicensed.
I don't have any problem with that. I think that's a good idea. So I would just say maybe with LCSW, add kind of like the other ones, LCSW, licensed clinical social workers, parentheses, LCSWs, focus on whatever, or yeah, I don't know. That was just, yeah. So like I said, it's,
just a question. Are these changes, really critical to the document, I guess, or we probably want to avoid wordsmithing as a committee, as long as it's readable and understandable and staff has done good work. I just want to make sure that this is really something that is really a substantive issue that we need to address, or is it more of just a writing style issue?
I wouldn't say it's substantive, something huge, but it's just, I think, more the writing style. That's just a suggestion. So.
Okay. Well, then would it be appropriate to just kind of, for Roseanne, that, you've heard some suggestions about minor changes, and those are, feedback and suggestions. You could take them or not, but overall, I think the content of the document seems to be, there seems to be consensus about approval of the concepts.
Yeah, what I can do is before we we can post it, but before we post it, we'll see if there's anything that can be made a little bit more consistent across the documents without kind of damaging the integrity of what each specific one is trying to say. If we could maybe move it around so it's in a little bit of a better order, we can take a look at that before we post it.
Okay. Are there any other comments from the board? And with that, we will go to the public.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I just want to jump in really quick. I appreciate the discussion on this item. And if the comments that have been made, particularly by our board member, is to make the language more clear and concise and more readable for the public, I think what she's saying or suggesting should be taken into consideration. I'm also curious to see what the audience members would comment on this too. So I'm looking forward to public comments if there are any. Being that I'm a public member, I would be reading this document, as a layman, if you will. So, but it's also nice to hear from those that are licensed, so that we get a good mix of the two. So I just appreciate what our board member is bringing forth, and would appreciate hearing from our public members. That's all. Thank you.
Great. And it is that time to hear from the public. So moderator, if you would open the Q&A.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've opened up the Q&A. If any member of the public wishes to make a comment on this agenda item, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, or you may simply raise your hand. And I see we already have a raised hand. Kimberly Miller, you should be able to unmute yourself. There you go.
Just a brief moment. I know that you guys are trying to define what each profession is, but I'm speaking on behalf of actually my daughter, who is a consumer. She has had medical issues, and we've run into issues where nurses are doing the roles of social workers. And in fact, through her insurance, they sent a nurse to do a mindfulness guided imagery therapy. So I think there needs to be awareness that in amongst all that's being decided about defining what each of our professions are, there needs to be some clear boundaries by these other professions, because what's going on with the nurses, they're taking over the social workers' jobs because of the shortage, and the doctors don't like our ethics because when they ask us to do something, we're told in our ethics not to do some of the things that they probably would ask us to do. And if you tell them you're not going to do it, they'll just go get a nurse, go around you. And that lies in a problem that I have witnessed over the last 4 years. They've kind of taken away some of the power of the social workers that are available in the hospital. I just wanted to make you aware of that other professions are stepping in on our scope of practice and competence. That's all I have.
All right, next we have a comment from Rebecca Gonzalez, and please keep in mind that we are receiving comments on agenda item number 6. Rebecca Gonzalez, you should be able to unmute.
Thank you. Rebecca Gonzalez, National Association of Social Workers, California chapter. Just to let you know that we did work with Roseanne to redo our section of this document based on some comments the last time we reviewed this. And I appreciate, Roseanne, that you pointed out that first very part of our explanation that says our clinical and non-clinical social workers is really crucial for consumers to know that. So we did change the focus of our section to really just mainly talk about clinical social workers, because that's what this document is about. But that first little paragraph is really important for our profession because we're a little bit different than the LMFTs and the LPCCs who really, when you get those degrees, you really just go into the clinical aspect, whereas some social workers do not do that. So I want to thank you for your hard work on this document. And I also want to thank Ms. Uribe for agreeing that first part about social workers is important, or the distinguishment between clinical and non-clinical. Thank you.
All right, this is the moderator. I see no further requests for comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, back to the board. If there's any other additional comments following a public comment. I'm scrolling through because I can't see all of you at once, but okay, it looks like no hands up. And Roseanne, I think you have the feedback from us on that. And
yes,
so
yes. We'll take a look at if there's any sort of non-substantive technical changes that maybe we can do to improve it a little bit, improve the flow without changing the document substantively, and then we'll go ahead and post it.
Okay. Great, thank you. And here, I think we're moving to item 8. The presentation on the purpose and validity of professional examinations by the Department of Consumer Affairs Office of Professional Examination Services. And so I will turn it over to the presenters.
Yes, I can just do a quick introduction. We've been having discussions, as you know, in the past board meetings and some committee meetings about exams and the disparities that exist, definitely in the ASWB exam that was shown back in 2022. I thought it was important to kind of give an overview of kind of why we use licensure exams and the validity of this. So I asked OPES to come here to talk to us a little bit about, the validity of exams. They actually made a memo that was in our last board meeting packet, and this is kind of their chance to actually kind of verbally guide us through the process and their thoughts on this. So we have Robert Calvert here today, I think is going to be leading the presentation, and also Heidi Linzer, who's the chief of OPES. So thank you both for doing this today, and I will let you have the floor.
Greetings, committee. Can we get an audio check? Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Okay, let me see if I can get my video going for you, which I don't see. Am I authorized to turn my, oh, there we go, got it. Oh, no, I can't connect to camera. Sorry, you'll just have a gray box. Unless, moderator, should I be able to start my camera and cannot?
So if you want to start your camera, it's kind of weird. It's called Start Video.
No, will. Okay, I did quick start video. When I click that, it says can't connect to camera.
Okay, you should be able to do so. It's activated.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna go with, unfortunately, my camera's not gonna be on, it looks like. I don't think we want to spend time. The camera's working. Okay. I'm just not gonna do that. I apologize, committee, that I can't get the camera to work. I did. Oh, and now it works. All right. Well, we have a camera now. Hello. So for some context before we get going, I don't have control of the slide deck. Is that correct? So I need to ask for next slide.
Correct.
Okay, great. So just for context, we, the Office of OPS submitted a memo back earlier this year regarding validity of licensure exams. And there were some areas of that memo we want to clarify. We're also trying to add some generic background information about examinations, validity, and bias. Can I get the next slide, please? Here's an overview of what we're going to be talking about. We're going to talk about examinations, race, and bias broadly. We're going to talk about ways that you can look into differing pass rates and how that can relate to questions about validity or bias. And then we're going to talk a little bit about cautions when consuming research. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, so this is some context. First, standardized academic tests consistently show differences by race. They do this for many different types of tests at different stages in development, from third graders up to, as is exampled here, college graduates. That's across the field. ASWB recently released their pass rates disaggregated by race, which showed a dramatic difference in pass rate for Black candidates as compared to other candidates. That's the context in which we're speaking. Next slide, please. Because I like to start with the space of, do we agree in bases, kind of the base of the argument or the base premises, I have some things here that I believe we all agree on. First, and I think this is very important to note, systemic racism is real, powerful, and ubiquitous. I'm not going to pause to have all of us nod our heads. I'm pretty sure we can agree on that one. But I do want to say, for record and by us, OPS fully grants that that is true and that it's critical to our profession in considering that. Next, that a valid examination is going to show a difference where that difference exists. There's no way to have a valid exam and have it not measure differences. Next, that counseling is a skill. That skill can be measured with an acceptable degree of error. I want to emphasize there will for sure be error. This is a construct. It's a thing we've put together. We can't directly measure it. And last, that a licensing entity exists to protect the public from unqualified practitioners. So when we consider all of these, next slide please, we're faced with a problem. How can a licensing entity make licensure decisions without disproportionately excluding disenfranchised minorities from the profession? Going back to the beginning, we know that standardized tests have different pass rates. We know this across the board from many standardized tests. It may be easy to infer then that the test is itself biased, and that's part of what I'm going to talk about is what does and doesn't make something biased from a psychometrician point of view. That isn't necessarily from everyone's point of view. Next slide. The joy here is that I have a solution to that problem. The solution to the problem is that you choose the testing option that gives you the greatest ability to limit construct-relevant variables and gives you the most information about the licensee, the person you're considering licensing. In other words, if you're going to have to decide who does and doesn't get a license, you want to choose the one that has the most tools for detecting bias and gives you the most information about the skill of the person you're trying to make the decision on. Now, I'm going to try to make the contention that a standardized test is that solution. But regardless, you should choose a solution, I believe, that meets those two criteria. Next slide. I want to just define some terms so that when I say them, we're clear what I'm talking about. The first is when I say difference, I'm using shorthand. I mean, a statistically significant difference exists between two groups. So if I say that the pass rate for group A is different from the pass rate of group B, I mean that that difference is large enough that we believe that it isn't just by chance. Second, and I'm going to mention this a few times, is what a construct-irrelevant variable is. I gave some examples here of race, ethnicity, test-taking ability, but in reality, a construct-irrelevant variable is anything that isn't the construct, the thing we're trying to measure. What we're trying to measure in licensure is whether or not a candidate meets the minimum requirements in order to be licensed, what we would call a minimally competent candidate. That's the construct we're measuring. So any variable that isn't that construct is construct irrelevant. And last, when I say something is biased, what I mean that a difference exists based on a construct irrelevant factor. That doesn't mean that there's just a difference. It means that there's a difference and we can link it back to that thing that is construct irrelevant. I'm going to say that last one a few times, so just be prepared for repetition. Next slide. So as I told you, I was going to go through and try to talk about the different options that I can see for your licensure decision. I fully grant there are other options. These are just pretty commonly used ones. Standardized tests, we've talked about, that's what we're currently using. You can then move to what would be considered an alternate pathway or an oral examination and essay examination. And we can kind of imagine what those would look like. They've been used in the past. Then we can say there's no examination. You just need internships and experience, and that qualifies you to practice. Or we can go even further back and say all you need to do is finish some educational curriculum, and that qualifies you to practice. All of these have been used in different places at different times. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk for a moment about the tools that standardized tests have to detect bias or to minimize bias. First, and this is the most important based on the standards, is that the entire process relies on representative SMEs. That means we need to get people that represent the profession and are representative of subgroups in that profession to all weigh in on every step through the process. So an SME is going to write the items. And part of the process of training an SME to write the item is to understand what a extraneous variable is, what something that's construct irrelevant is, how to detect that in the writing, how to try to remove it. At the very beginning, we're talking about that. We then have subject matter experts who are putting the examination together, who want to look at every item and say, this item we don't think matters, or this item we think is going to harm one group, or there's something in the phrasing of this that just doesn't hit me right. They don't have to give concrete reasons. They're the subject matter expert. They look at the item, they say, this isn't going well for us, and we consider it, and that's going to go back to review, and some other group of experts are going to review that item. Next, and this is, in my opinion, one of the most critical components, is that subject matter experts decide what score you need on the examination to pass. So they're looking this over and saying, we believe that someone that is minimally competent is going to get this many of all of these questions correct. Where that number is set clearly is going to relate to your pass rate. And we have to put that back to the subject matter expert who knows what minimally competent is in their field. Last, all of these items are reviewed for the content and bias before they go out, separate from the SMEs. So the SMEs are going to review it from the bias. I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. The SMEs review for bias explicitly. So there's a review stage separate from the writing stage where we're looking through and saying, is there anything about this question that isn't relevant to what we're trying to test? I'm done with subject matter experts. In addition to that, in some of these larger examinations, there are entire committees who are trained to identify items that are culturally biased or potentially culturally biased. And I'll note my use of the word maybe there because you don't actually know if something's biased just by looking at the words. The way you know something is biased is by the statistical analysis. And that's a section I'm going to get into more later. It's also something that really you can only apply to a standardized test. There's no statistical analysis that's going to be able to determine whether or not an internship is biased. We can say that there's a difference, that one group gets through the internship at a different rate than another group does, but we can't get to that level of bias. And I'm going to remind you that what I mean by bias is that there's a difference in group based on a construct or relevant variable. And we can't drill down to that level of specificity in anything other than a standardized test. Next slide, please. This is a summary of those options for you. I'm not going to spend a ton of time reading the chart, but I want to explain what I mean by this, and then we're going to kind of hit some high points. So the first is that as we move from the top to the bottom, we're really moving away from large amounts of SME involvement directly. Instead, you're ending up with faculty or someone else. Now, you might ask me, well, aren't faculty subject matter experts? Well, they are in one sense, but they're not representative. They aren't the entry-level subject matter expert. They aren't a person who is likely actively in practice. They're an academic, which is why I would say the SME involvement is low. When we consider the statistical methods to evaluate bias, I told you earlier that standardized examinations let you do that. Education and experience definitely don't. And then I put the word difficult with written, and that's only because though it is conceptually possible to try to find that, it's going to be really, really hard. Because we have the question, well, was the evaluator biased? Was the way the question was written biased? Was the way that the evaluator worded the question biased? Like, there are lots of factors that are difficult to control to then evaluate for bias in that scenario. The next column is the differences for potential bias. And this is something that might not right now appear as exceptionally relevant, but the question is, can we say for sure that something is biased? Or do we just say that there's a difference and then be concerned that there's a difference, but not know why necessarily that difference exists? With standardized examinations, we can go further than just saying there's a difference. We can establish yes or no at an item level, is this thing biased? My next column for you is the benefit to the entity for candidate passing. That's a strange concept, so I'm going to explain what I mean. I'm going to go to the bottom for education. If I'm running a school, I have a strong incentive to pass my candidates. I have that strong incentive because I continue to be paid. I'm not saying every school is going to act towards that incentive. I'm just saying that there is an incentive there. There is a very low incentive for a standardized examination to pass or fail any individual candidate because it doesn't have an active investment in the outcome of that particular candidate. Its aim is the validity of the examination. My last column is entity oversight. You as a committee clearly have a large amount of oversight over standardized examinations, which is why I'm presenting to you. As we move down, you as a committee likely have very little oversight over educational systems. That doesn't mean necessarily that education is bad. I'm just pointing out that there are less checks against bad actors. Next slide, please. Because I've talked about it a little bit, I just want a slide to hammer this down. It's easy to observe that there is a difference. Every standardized test that gathers the information knows whether or not there's a difference in the pass rates for their examinees. Very few people who produce tests publish that. Once they've published, once we know that there's a difference, the question becomes, okay, is this difference based in bias, or is it based in construct relevant factors that are unfortunately a product of many experiences of these candidates? In the event that you stop at just saying there's a difference, you don't know which one it is. Next, and this is just a reminder from earlier, sorry about that, a valid examination is going to show a difference that exists. So if there's a difference between groups, either there's a bias to some extent, or there's actually an underlying difference in the skill to some extent, and the source of that difference in the skill is very difficult to determine. And that's where I come with my last slide in here. There are many things that can contribute to differences. So if we use one grouping category, we may not be getting down to the actual cause of why there's a difference between groups. Next slide, please. And next slide again. I lied. Sorry, can you go back one? And then to the committee, I'd like to open for questions right now for a moment, if that's acceptable, because I don't want to get past some of the things I said, and you're wanting to keep that question right now. Is that okay, moderator, whoever?
Sure. We can look to the board to see if you will have any questions at this point. Okay. I don't see any hands up. Oh, wait, Dr. Walker.
Yeah, I'm not so sure if I have a question. It's more so than a comment. I'm kind of reacting. I am really engaged in this presentation. It's I think you're really hitting hard here for me, and owning the facts and the statistics and the biases and the truth of what we do know. And it sounds like we're having a solution-based conversation, which I can appreciate. And I guess my thought and reaction here, two words come up for me, needs analysis. And I guess I'm thinking of the cohort or the groups of experts that you've mentioned, the SMEs, and then I'm thinking of the folks that are taking the exam, the test. And do we have a connection or some kind of engagement there that's based on a needs analysis from the two entities, if you will? Is that coming up in your presentation, or is that correlation, is that a factor that has been taken into consideration?
I'm going to ask a clarifying question.
Sure.
So when you just mentioned two groups. We have the SMEs who are involved in the examination construction, and you have the candidate who has yet to pass the examination. Mm-hmm. Are you asking, is there a process to make sure that the SMEs are aligned with or representative of those candidates?
Yes, I am.
Okay, yes, there is a process for that. It is outlined in the standards. It is something that we document and could present to you at a later time what that overlap looks like.
Greatly appreciate it. Continue on. This is really, really fascinating.
Great. Any other comments or questions from board members at this point? Okay.
I have a question. There was a statement saying group differences may exist without bias. Can you explain that a little bit?
I'd be happy to. My next set of slides go into that, but I want to talk about it first before I get to the slides. So in order for there to be a difference, it's very simple. We compare two groups and we say one group gets more or less than the other group. None of us have difficulty comprehending that. That's standard language, but the language of bias is used differently in common language than it would be used in a statistics point of view. So bias from a psychometrician from a statistics point of view says there is a difference, and that difference can be directly related to a construct irrelevant variable. In other words, the difference isn't based on skill, it's based on something else we weren't trying to measure. There are lots of examples of construct irrelevant skills, but there is a possibility that an examination is valid and a group difference exists, which is to say that it's measuring different skills or different skills by group. It's also possible to be that the examination itself has items in it that disproportionately harm one group over another group. In that case, we would call the examination biased. Please ask a follow-up question if that didn't address it.
Seems like,
Was that okay?
think so. Okay, so with no other board comments, we can continue forward with the presentation.
Excellent. Thank you. Next slide. So I'm going to give you guys an example here, and this is completely hypothetical. It is not based in real data. It is not based in our world. This is just talking about numbers. There are two examinations, which I named Test 1 and Test 2, and we're applying these examinations to different groups, Group 1 and Group 2. Just off the cuff, without additional data, we can look and see that Group 1 has a different pass rate than Group 2 does. We can also look and say that Test 2 has roughly equal pass rates by the two groups. In the absence of additional information, we may be inclined to believe that Test 2 is superior to Test 1. And what I'm going to try to show you in this very hypothetical examination is that, in fact, is not the case. Test 1 is the superior examination in this scenario. Next slide, please. Hopefully this is large enough. Now, I will fully own that this could have been potentially presented in a different way, and I apologize for those of us who looked at numbers in a chart and went, what are you doing to me? So I'm going to try my best to explain what could be confusing here. I have this Group 1 example. You could consider this as a race, a gender. It is not relevant. I'm just naming it Group 1. And in this group, you have different skill sets of different people. We're not making any assertion as to how many people are in each group. We're just saying from any group, you have very high skilled and very low skilled people. That's just the nature of a normal distribution. So for this scenario, we're starting on the left, and this is what people walked into the world with, their God-given ability. Probably shouldn't use that, but sorry. Anyway, they walked into the world on the left. And as they move through time, moving from left to right, life changes them. We've all experienced this. For this made-up example, in the event you're in any of the top 4 skill groups, you do okay. Either you keep the same skill you would have started with, or you increase in skill. But if you're in the bottom 2 skill groups here, you continually get worse. Now remember, this is all within a single group. This is all people that are, say, from the southern states of the United States. It's a grouping variable, and it says that your experiences are different based on your skill. We can consider that with like a tracking education system where you're taking one group of people and tracking them towards vocational trades and taking another group of people and tracking them towards college. We can imagine this, but again, this is hypothetical. I'm not trying to get into why this was the case. The takeaway I need from you to take from this chart is that if you're in Group 1 and you have the lowest or the second lowest amount of skill, life is hard and things go poorly. Next slide, please. Now I'm switching on you. We need to bend our brain a little bit. Now I'm just talking about the end of the previous slide because we're giving an examination. We're giving an examination at a point in time. This point in time has many experiences that people have had that led up to the point where we're giving the exam. And consequently, we can't measure where you started. We only measure where you are when we're giving the examination. The purpose of this chart is to show you that there are 2 examinations and that they measure skill differently. The blue line is skill. You'll notice without any looking at numbers that the orange line roughly follows the blue line. Put a different way, the orange test is valid. It measures the skill of the group that it's trying to measure. The gray test is not valid. It doesn't really follow the blue line. It underreports the skill of the highest performing candidates and overreports the skill of the lowest performing candidates. Consequently, if we were to use that gray test, you would be admitting to practice people who have well below the level of skill they should to practice, as determined by subject matter experts. Next slide, please. Now, because I'm being a little bit more nitpicky than I should be, we now have a different group. So take what I just explained to you, and that was what one group of people experienced through society in their life. This next group of people have different experiences. In this group of people, basically, you end up, quote unquote, okay, unless you're the lowest skill group. The lowest skill group gets really kind of smashed by life in this scenario. They get a 30 skill at the end. But the 60 raises up to a 70 by the end of the time. Now, the 100 also drops to 85, but we're not going to talk about that. The point being that group 2 has a different set of life experiences that end in different average results for different skills. Consequently, when we measure those, we're going to come up with different results. So if we get the next slide, these exams are the same exam they were before. The examinations that were given to group 1 are given to group 2. The orange line still roughly matches the blue line. The gray line is closer to the blue line, but that might just be by chance. We don't really know. And, oh, I just lost my slide. That's exciting. And again, the gray examination overestimates the lowest level of skill. Put a different way, the gray test is not discerning. It is not valid. It's not measuring the thing it set out to measure. Next slide. These are the same tests we just talked about. The orange test is valid. It showed a difference. The gray test is not valid, but it didn't show a difference. Now, I want to be very clear. This was a hypothetical examination, or hypothetical scenario. I'm not saying that this represents our world at all. What I am trying to get to is that a valid examination is going to show a difference, and that difference may reflect reality, and another examination that isn't valid may tell you that two things are equal or that are not. Next slide, please. Now that I've done that, we have differences, but we don't know if it's bias yet. So how do we distinguish difference from bias? Difference is unfortunate, but likely a statement about experiences and society. Bias is something that is very bad and is within our control to fix. So we need to know which one of these two things it is. First, if you have a standardized examination, you can do this. In reality, you can't do this with other sets. You can't really hammer out and say, is it bias or is it just a difference? So you have to rely on differences. The answer to this question is something called a diff analysis. And that's some math, and we're going to talk about that coming up shortly, but I want to prepare you that math is on its way. Next slide. This is my example for you of diff, which is differential item functioning. I grant there are a whole bunch of circles and strange things here. You may be appreciative that it's not a ton of math, so let's see how we do. This is an example in which the item represented is bad. Diff would call out this item as bad, and the reason it would call it out is when we look at the blue group, we check and see how much skill does the blue group need in order to get the question right, and the answer is 5. So the guy with 6 skill got it right, but the person with 3 and the person with 2 did not get the question right. Whereas if I go look at the yellow group, the skill needed is 3. Consequently, the 2 people with a skill of 3 get this question right. This is differential item functioning. Based on what group you're in, determines how hard the question is to get correct or not. Can I get a nod of a head? Yes, we're okay with this. Okay. My next slide is an example in which there is no differential item functioning. Next slide, please. The only difference is that we changed the skill needed. The skill is the same between groups. Now they both require a 5. Now no one in the yellow group gets it right. That's okay. The underlying skill is the same. So this item would not show differential item functioning. The last item would have shown differential functioning. Next item, please. This is a different way to think about diff. It's actually a whole different set of procedures, but I'm not getting into the math of the procedure. I'm just going to explain. We start off with 3 different groups, and the size of the circle represents the amount of skill. So these 3 groups, individuals from the groups, candidates, all have equal skill. Their information is fed into a model, and the model predicts that they will all answer this question correctly. But the model's wrong about the yellow group. Now, if it's just wrong once or twice out of some number of people, that's not a big deal. But if it is consistently wrong with a yellow group, what we can say is this is a case where this item does not function equally. In other words, a person's skill is not a good predictor of them getting the answer correct if they're in the yellow group, but it is if they're in the blue group or the orange group. That is differential item functioning. That is bias. That is a thing we can detect and remove. Next slide. I promised math was coming. This is math. If you're not a math person, you can just relax for a moment. It won't be long. Just to save you the time adding them up, I say the sum of errors there. That does not add up these numbers. That is square these numbers and then add them up. Order of operations. So that bottom row is a rough approximation of how wrong we were. Okay. Clearly, we don't want to be wrong. So if we're just looking at the bottom row, the first item and the last item are bad. The second item's somewhat bad, and the third item's pretty good, without any more math. Now I want to talk about what this means. So we're looking at a column. I'm just going to be considering item 1 right now. In order for a diff to work, we have to have a prediction, and we have to have reality. I have an estimate of your skill. I predict the chance that you get this question right, and then you take the question. So you get it right or you don't. If we have both of those things, we know our error. I predicted you'd get it right, you got it right, no error. I predicted you'd get it right, you get it wrong, error. I predicted wrong, you got it right, error. Now, a good item predicts well. In the event that we're not talking about groups and we're just saying all people taking a test, items 1 and 4 would have been removed off the bat right away because those items don't seem to predict skill for the population, for anyone. That is not a diff analysis. That's just normal statistics. What is a diff analysis is this. Assume that these questions do a good job of predicting for everyone, for the whole pile of people. But then we take out a group that we're interested in and we look at, yes, but do those questions predict well for this group, for the group I'm interested in detecting bias for? And if the answer is no, they don't, then there's bias. Then we know that though the item is good for the large population, it disproportionately harms this group of people. We should remove that biased question. Next slide, please. Some people have spoken about differential test functioning. I want to speak briefly on what this is because it sounds good and potentially isn't. So to start, we have a box full of biased and unbiased questions. How do we know they're biased? Differential item functioning. We just did that. You must know that an item is or is not biased in order for differential test functioning to work. You then ask a question that I don't know you should ask, which is how many of these items that I know are biased should I keep in the test? And how many should I remove? Emphasis, I know a question is biased and I'm trying to decide how many biased questions I want to keep. Spoiler, the answer is 0. But from a differential test functioning point of view, you would say, okay, I have biased and unbiased questions. Let me look and see how many biased questions I need to remove so that the test performs similarly to a scenario in which it had no biased questions. Okay. The only reason you would ever do this is if you were unwilling to remove all the biased questions. At which point, if you can imagine someone who made that decision coming before you and saying, yes, we knew the items were biased, but we decided to leave them in anyway because it didn't really make a big difference. Imagine your response. That's what differential test functioning is doing. Differential item functioning is a higher bar. It says if there's a difference by race, by group we care about, if we can detect the bias, get rid of the bias. All of it. We don't care how much it's affecting the outcome. Get rid of bias. And I think we can all agree that's a higher bar and a better standard to use. Next slide. All right. This is sorry, I need to find something to read to you. Next is fine, but all right. Next slide. When we issued our memo, there was a particular sentence that we believe wasn't interpreted the way we meant it, which is our fault, and I wanted to add some clarity. I'm therefore going to read that sentence for you. I'm maybe going to read it more than once. The claim that examinations are racially biased is concerning and misleading. Psychometricians are actively engaged in process to increase the fairness of examinations. What we mean, what that's saying, is if you're making a claim for bias, you should support your claim of bias. If you're making a claim of difference and saying it's bias, that's concerning and misleading. That's what we mean. There's not a ton more there. I have here a few statements. One of them has a typo, which I apologize for. But these are some examples of claims that, in our view, are misleading. The first one is the one with a typo, just for fun. It says race as a predictor of outcome is evidence of bias. They're not supposed to be there. That's the claim. The reality is it's not. If you have race as a predictor of an outcome, what you are using is a variable, and you're saying this predicts that. Yes, that is true. Race predicts many, many things. We know that. That doesn't mean that the thing that it is measuring is a bias. As I said earlier, the question is it construct irrelevant or is it not construct irrelevant? Construct relevant, basically. We can't get from predictor to bias. The way we get to bias is what I just spoke to you about, which is differential item functioning. It says that these things work differently for one group than another group. In the event that race is a predictor of an outcome, and that outcome is unfortunate, we very much want to look into it. It could be an indication of bias. It is concerning for sure. But to make the leap from predictor to bias is a misleading statement. Next one. This is just I'm sorry, back and next of my bullets. When you read a claim about a pass rate, unless that pass rate is published by the person who made the examination, I encourage you to be skeptical. The reason I encourage you to be skeptical about it is it's very hard to find out what that is because you're taking a sample. That sample could be wrong. Of course, it could not be wrong. All of statistics is based around the idea of taking a sample and inferring something that's true about a population, but you should be cautious. And as a board, you should request the examination pass rates by group from anyone you deal with. That is within your power. But if someone publishes and says that the pass rate for group A is 40%, and then they tell you that what they did was go and make a public records request for the number of times it took a person to pass that test from all of the people who have already passed the test, that's not the same thing. I'm not saying that it's not relevant information. I'm saying be cautious because it's hard to get the true value unless you're the person who holds the data. My third bullet point is anecdotal evidence. I am not saying that anecdotal evidence doesn't matter. In fact, it really does. All of qualitative research, in reality, comes down to a lot of anecdotal evidence. But it, like a difference, like a predictive outcome, is an indication that we should look into something, that we should find out what is going on here. But it isn't in itself evidence of bias, necessarily. Now, it could very quickly lead to bias because you could hear what someone says, go verify it, and then say, yep, that's bias. But we need to take the second step. We need to be able to verify the claim if we're going to be making claims in an academic space. And last, I just spent some time talking about diff and differential item functioning, differential test functioning. When people are talking to you about these, the thing I want you to remember, please, is that it relies on the underlying skill of the candidate. It's not just a difference in pass rate. It's a difference in pass rate of similarly skilled people. And it's not even the pass rate, it's the passing of a given item, because that's item functioning. On the differential test function, if you were to do it, and I just explained why you shouldn't, it's also the pass rate of similarly skilled people. And we need to keep that similarly skilled in mind. That's where bias comes in. Next slide, please. There were some claims made about validity. I'm not necessarily going to go into all of the claims about validity, but I want to talk about validity because validity is very important. Roughly speaking, validity says, are you doing what you said you were doing? Are you measuring what you said you're measuring? Or are you doing something else? For example, a test that purports to be measuring, say, ability to be an architect, but is really measuring your ability to read carefully, isn't a good test. It's not valid. We're not measuring what we said we were measuring. There are lots of ways to get to the idea of validity. And in general, you want as many as are applicable to the scenario you're in. But some situations lend themselves much more to validity, some tests than others, to some types of validity. So I'm going to talk briefly about validity in the examination space. And first, I'm going to talk about it from a predictive point of view. In order for predictive validity to be applicable, it is critical that the thing you're measuring, the outcome, directly relates to your construct, to the thing you were trying to measure. So just to define my terms, the construct in this case for examination is minimally competent. It says this person has at least the lowest level, as evidence, the lowest level of skill necessary for us to say they can practice. And then we need an outcome to link back to what that is. And the closer that outcome is to the construct, the more appropriate predictive validity is. However, if that outcome is tenuously connected to the construct, predictive validity becomes less and less applicable. So when you're considering claims of predictive validity, you always want to ask, was the thing I'm measuring as the outcome really the thing I was trying to measure in the beginning? And if they're the same, predictive validity is wonderful. If they're not, predictive validity doesn't apply. The other two types I want to talk about for a minute are construct validity. Construct validity is directly from the standards of our profession, the gold standard of what we should be doing. And that says we need to be construct and content. But construct validity says we need to be very clear about the skill we're measuring, and that skill needs to basically be understood and defined by subject matter experts. In other words, we don't want some nebulous thing that we're measuring how good of a person you are and nobody can agree on what that is. That would not have construct validity. Construct validity, yes. Content validity says that the questions, the things that you're asking, A, are accurate, and B, matter. Pretty much. And C, relate to your profession, which would be part of the mattering. So both construct and content are part of the standards. And I want to talk to you about how we address those and then say we always want more methods to become more valid. No one is going to say, we're willing to just kind of take a little bit of this stuff that's evidence we're not valid. So where there are suggestions or articles that are presented to you that are saying, hey, they should consider this type of validity, we're very interested, but we need to consider how it applies to the space. So I'm going to talk about content and construct a little bit here. I just did. The last one is construct clarity, and that says that we have communicated to the candidate pool the thing that we're measuring in a way that they can understand what we're doing. So it's not this nebulous idea. It's like, this is what we mean, this is what we're going to test you on, and this is why we think it matches what we said we were going to try to measure. That's clarity. We are required by the standards to have construct validity, content validity, and construct clarity. Those are required. So now I'm going to tell you what we do that adds to this. I'm not saying it proves any of these, because validity is a goal. It's not obtained, right? We're trying to get as close to perfect validity as we could, and we're using as many tools as we can to get there. So I want to make that clear. On the content validity side, we consider the subject matter experts I discussed earlier, who are going to go through an occupational analysis and define in incredible detail every piece of what it means to be a particular profession. We do this for all professions. We are mandated by the standards and by law to perform an occupational analysis. That defines the content that is applicable to an examination. It is defined by subject matter experts. It is reviewed by many different groups of experts. And that becomes the content that we're going to be interacting with. The construct is the minimally competent candidate. And that is, again, defined by subject matter experts. It's considered by subject matter experts when they write their questions. We are not writing questions for the goody-goody A+ student. We are writing questions to try to determine what this minimally competent candidate, whether they're there or not. That's part of it from SME. And similarly, when we're making a passing score for the construct, we're bringing to mind for that subject matter expert, what does it mean to be minimally competent? You're the experts, but I really want to focus you in. We are trying to decide the number, the passing score, that demonstrates minimal competence. And we're looking at this at every item. That's the process. I can go into more of that later if you would like, but the point is that the standards of our profession mandate those two. They also mandate how you do them, and we do them the way that the standards mandate. Next slide. Questions? Please ask questions.
Okay. Board members, I see Board Member Huft with his hand up.
Hi, yeah, thank you. I appreciate you providing this presentation. I think the board has been appreciative of OPES's presentations in the past, including yours, Dr. Calvert, so thank you. I have some questions and some comments and some concerns. So bear with me. I'll speak to all of them, and then maybe you can address them at the end. So I think first, saying that evidence of racial difference isn't evidence of racial bias is misleading, because there are other upstream factors like income and education level and racialized experiences in internship sites, in schools, that are directly related. And so, yes, differences in success can happen, but that success should not be stratified based on race and ethnicity or other construct irrelevant variables, which is what we're seeing happen, right? And those include things like test taking skills and strategies, right, which are also racialized. And so if we say that we are measuring like similarly skilled individuals, but those skills have notable and measured racial differences, then we are, for all intents and purposes, measuring racial differences. Skills just then a proxy for race. I think I'm also concerned about the discussion on differential item functioning, because it is nice, but California doesn't collect racial data. We cannot appropriately do DIF or DTF, differential test functioning. So I think to present DIF as this way to mitigate racial biases is misleading, since we can't appropriately do that. And we don't do that for some of the other licensing exams. Additionally, and not directly related to racial biases, but related to the validity, OPES relies on subject matter experts, but I don't think that I have ever seen any clarification about where the ultimate sources of truth or evidence come from. OPES does not, to my knowledge, provide any information about what is considered the most appropriate law, the most appropriate ethic, the most appropriate clinical practice to follow. And this presents problems. So if I'm looking at CAMPT and AMPT Code of Ethics, there are seemingly opposing ethical expectations at times. And it would not be clear to me as a test taker what I would then be tested on or how I'm expected to answer. Also related to validity, I think that the overall format, and I know this has been talked about in previous board meetings, brief multiple choice questions that force a clinician to choose one correct answer without consultation, without working with a supervisor, without working with a colleague, without working with a client, is categorically disconnected from the real work that they will be doing, and completely disconnected from arguably the most important skills therapists would need, including clinical social workers. So again, while I appreciate this presentation, I feel that there is like a little bit of a slipperiness here about what we say we want to happen and the ideal version of what we want to happen, and what is actually happening. And so when I hear concerns from MFTs and social workers, as well as other board members, and then I hear OPES's response, it feels a bit like we're just talking past each other. So perhaps you can speak to any of that. Thank you.
I'd like to, but I'd like to do it in pieces. Can you hit F1, Heidi?
Sure, thank you.
Sorry, technical issues. I took a few notes. I didn't get all of it, so I'm sorry. I'm going to just try to recap. The first note I have is this presentation wasn't necessarily about OPS examinations or about the ASWB. It was about what examinations should and shouldn't do. That's my first piece. To the diff functioning of California exams, I believe your previous bullet point that somehow we skipped from 6 to 8 is you discussing whether or not you're going to gather demographic data. In the event that you gather demographic data, we would absolutely immediately institute diff analysis. Up to this point, we have been actively restricted from gathering that data. The next is on the idea of diff, and I'm trying to pull back to what you were saying when you commented on the diff and differential test functioning as missing what you were asking about of similarly skilled. I want to take a minute and talk about what we mean by similarly skilled, okay? Because what we mean and what you mean might be very different. What a psychometrician means by similarly skilled is of any group of people, you will have high performers and low performers. If the high performers from one group do differently on an item than high performers from another group, we would establish that as differential item functioning. And that has nothing to do with the proportion of high performers from each group. So it does get to the idea of underlying skill, but then you said, but wait, maybe multiple choice isn't the way to measure this at all, right? So I will agree with you that the distance between a multiple choice question and reality is vast. I have no contention there. What I said earlier and want to emphasize is in the event you move to something that is closer to reality, but such as an internship or observations or insert any of the things you have in your mind as alternative pathways, you have gotten closer to reality, but you have also decreased the amount of control you have against bias. Bias has historically been very present in oral examinations. However, and internships, however, it's also very hard to prove. You're then balancing the closer to reality piece with the less control that you have. And that's a board decision, that's not mine. But I do agree that you're closer to reality, and in my opinion, you have less control. In a multiple choice test, you have much less control over the format, but you have a lot of control at determining whether or not different groups of similar skill perform differently on those items. Now, you might not be willing to accept that definition of bias. If that's the case, we mean different things by the word. If another option can be found that is more valid than a standardized test for options as presented, that would be wonderful. I think we're all on the same page. That would be good. The question becomes for me, what do you have the controls against bias and how do you do that? And that's not the subject of right now. I'm just trying to answer your piece. You had a very specific example of on a multiple choice test when you're asking about which of two methods you should use. I'm going to just agree with you. That question should not be on a test that evaluates minimum competence. If it was there and it was on one of our examinations, in my opinion, it was done in error. It's also unlikely to be it's also unlikely to be prevalent. I would be very surprised if there are very many of those. Now, I'm with you. I don't think there should be any. But what would have happened there, just to give you context, is that a group of subject matter experts said, this question really matters, we want it on the test. And we, as the facilitators of that meeting, generally speaking, defer to SMEs. I think that in reality, that's a question of personality and how much the proctor is going to fight back. But that's the reality. But in the end, a subject matter expert said, this question matters. It's relevant to minimum competence. And you look at that and say, I don't think it is. But that's a question of differing experts. Did I miss? I tried to hit them. I took some notes, but I didn't. I want to hit everything you have to say. I really am not trying.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Yeah, I think that you addressed all the points. To just reiterate, I think one of my big concerns is that you are presenting information as a potential way to mitigate bias, in particular DIF, I think. And I want to remind the other committee members and the public that we can't do DIF sort of in the way that you're proposing. So to offer it as a solution to mitigate racial bias, I want to make sure that we're all on the same page, that perhaps that is an option, but not an actual reality right now. It is not a
Are you talking about the California exams?
Yes,
or
yes,
okay.
In particular, yeah.
So I would again point out the agenda item 7.
Yeah.
Good to add that. And that when I'm presenting this as examinations in large, not necessarily ours. And you should act to try to decrease bias where you can see it clearly.
Okay. Any other questions from board members at this time? Okay. Seeing no raised hands, does this complete your presentation? Should we go to public comment, or do you have more?
I have no more presentation.
Okay. The moderator, let's go ahead and open public comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've opened up the Q&A panel. Members of the public who would like to comment, you may raise your hand or type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. We are displaying instructions, and I already see requests for comment. All right, so Ben, hold on, and I will allow you to unmute yourself. Okay, Ben, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Ben Caldwell, MFT, 4 points here, all related to fairness and validity. I'm going to talk fast. First, DIF testing has been an industry standard literally for decades. OPES appears to be the only mental health exam developer that hasn't been doing it. Second, as Mr. Huff noted, OPES is the only mental health exam developer that doesn't provide any public referencing at all for exam content. So examinees are left to guess which MFT code of ethics, whose research, and whose version of each theoretical model is the quote-unquote correct one. That makes their exams not fair tests of knowledge, but arbitrary tests of agreement with the undisclosed anchoring of the item writers. Third, evidence suggests there is construct-irrelevant variance all over these exams. In addition to demographic factors, one recent study showed that AI could pass the ASWB clinical exam without even seeing the questions, only responding to cues and patterns in the response options, otherwise known as test-taking skill. Finally, even in this presentation, you've heard OPES trying to have it both ways when it comes to predictive validity. A lack of predictive validity doesn't make a test invalid, that's true. But it does mean that you can't then use language that suggests that someone who fails the test will, quote, potentially cause public harm, as was present here on slide 28. That's a statement about future behavior, which you just said the test doesn't need or intend to predict. These are just the tip of the iceberg. OPES's practices do not meet industry standards in these and several other critical ways. As a result, rather than protecting the public, these exams do great harm to the mental health workforce and the communities we are trying to serve. There's plenty more, but I think I'm out of time. Thank you.
All right, our next request for comment is from Lynn Hugh. Hold on, Lawan. You should be able to unmute yourself. All right, we'll try that again. And I'm pretty sure I'm mispronouncing your name, so please forgive me. It looks Luan. You should be able to unmute yourself. We'll We'll try that one more time. So Luan, you should see a prompt to unmute yourself. There you go. You're unmuted.
Okay, great. With respect to the validity of the test and I think that you're arguing that there is no racial bias, and that is contingent on the fact that you're using subject matter experts. And so there's an assumption there that the subject matter experts themselves do not have racial biases, correct? And so I'm curious as to what the racial makeup of the subject matter experts are. And, it makes me wonder, because some of the conversations around the bail system and different data analytics has also racial dimensions to it, in the various conversations that are had around reinforcing racial biases that currently exist in the system and how they're perpetuated through data. And so I'm wondering if you've thought about that and what your thoughts are. Thank you.
All right, the next comment is from Adrian Shilton. Adrian, you should be able to unmute.
Hello, this is Adrian Shilton with the California Alliance of Child and Family Services. We are very concerned by the presentation and the comments today, and by a seeming unwillingness to examine the role of testing in the perpetuation of systemic racism. Here is what we know. There is a mental health workforce crisis, and that is not just in the lack of professionals, but in the lack of diverse professionals. We also know that systemic racism manifests in unequal behavioral health outcomes for children, youth, and adults. In other words, we need to do more. We need to have more diverse professionals that can meet our communities where they are. If we are going to change the trajectory of the mental health crisis and bring a measure of equality and access to our behavioral health system, we need to challenge all of our long-standing assumptions, including bias in testing. We can't put our heads in the sand when our communities are literally in crisis. We will have more to say later, and we look forward to sharing that with the board. Thank you.
All right, the next request for comment is from Kathy Atkins. Kathy, you should be able to unmute.
This is Kathy Atkins from CAMT. I want to thank the board and the committee and OPES for putting this forward. There's a lot to digest and assess, and I appreciate the committee hearing the feedback of the stakeholders. I also think as we go through this, it'll be interesting to see where this lands, especially as we assess what role testing plays in licensure, as well as which test California MFTs will end up with long term. So I just thank everybody for this. It's a complicated and charged conversation. I just appreciate everyone's feedback, both in the audience as well as on the committee and OPES. Thank you.
All right, the next comment is from Kimberly Miller. Kimberly, you should be able to unmute.
Oh, okay. Hello, thank you again. Thank you for the presentation. I have to kind of agree with Justin and with Ben because, right now, the ASWB, let's for instance say, I took the test again, and I've been taking the test for quite a while, and I feel like I do get worse because I'm studying myself to death. And what the survey that they're sending out after you don't pass the test was very, how do I say, I took it kind of personally and insulting that I don't study hard enough. When I've had study groups, I've read my old books again. I have done everything in my power. And this test has cost so many people their jobs. They've actually gotten they get fired if they don't make it by 6 years. So there's a lot of my friends are losing their jobs. And here we're needing to have people in their jobs. And a lot of it really comes from OJT, on the job training. You're going to learn under your supervisors. You're going to learn the policies of what that particular agency or specialty does. And that's what you're going to do, hopefully, for your life's career. But the thing is that that's not happening. And that's where we're in a shortage. There's even the schools are having low enrollment. They're scared to get into social work or even AMFTs because it's costing so much money.
15 seconds.
It costs so much money, the test fees, everything. Everybody's asking, why do we even have CEUs?
All right, the next comment is from Matt. Hold on, Matt, and I'll give you permission to unmute. All right, Matt, you should be able to unmute.
I had a couple of comments inside of the chat. I just wanted to know, in particular, why with OPES tests as well as with ASWB exams, they don't calculate the test information function. So the standards that ASWB cites and that OPES presented on require the calculation of the test information function as soon as possible when there are potential biases between race groups. And it is just alarming that that has not been done. The test information function is an extremely important result of IRT that, according to the standards, summarizes how well the test discriminates among individuals at various levels of ability of the trait being assessed. They don't use that. There are a lot of things like the test characteristic function, dependability matrices, all of which would allow exam developers to use the full set of multivariate supports that are needed to see whether these exams are truly valid or whether they include biases and construct irrelevant invariance that leads to some of the things that y'all are talking about. And it is a really big disservice to the research community and the social work community that this is not done.
All right, the next comment is from Rebecca Gonzalez. And Rebecca, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Rebecca Gonzalez with the National Association of Social Workers California chapter. I want to support many of the comments made after the presentation by Mr. Huff, Caldwell, Adrian Shilton, etc. Just want to preface my comments with saying systematic racism is real. I think we have all seen that. We need to recognize it, and we need to try to make our systems better to combat that. I think much of this presentation was premised on the assumption that testing can predict competent and safe clinical practice, and I would say that there's research out there that directly contradicts that. I would also say that a lot of the math thrown out here, I don't think it can explain everything. I think there needs to be a real conversation with clinicians of color about why they were not able to pass the test and how the questions did not reflect the experiences that they have had in their communities and how to best serve their communities and how those answers may be different than what is on the test. And I also want to say that this was a very long presentation, and I think we should have equal time for other researchers, such as Mr. Caldwell, to present their findings. Thank you.
All right, and I see no further requests for comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I'm gonna look back to my fellow board members to see if there's any additional questions after public comment. Okay, I think it's pretty clear we still have a lot more work to do on this topic. This being just a part of the conversation. Don't believe we have any actions here. So unless seeing no comments from the board, we will move on to item 7. the review and discussion of voluntary demographic survey for candidates taking board developed exams. And Steve, I believe you have before we start this, actually, do we need a break for the committee and for staff? Okay. It's 10 minutes work or 15?
10 minutes.
10 minutes? Okay. We'll take a brief 10-minute break before moving on. I apologize for that. Thank you. Back, just looking for board members. Okay. I have to scroll. Okay, so I think we still need board member Uribe. Okay, we are all back. Great. Welcome back to the, I guess now, Workforce Development Committee meeting. We'll be going to item 7, the review and discussion of voluntary demographic survey for candidates taking board developed exams item. And Steve, you are presenting on this one.
Yes, thank you, Wendy. I appreciate it. We took this out of order just because I know that Robert definitely would have been able to explain the diff analysis and what that entails. So thank you for that, Robert. Just to make it, I guess, short and sweet, since what we are looking at here is doing our own diff analysis for our 5 board developed exams. We work with OPES to develop all the law and ethics exams for 3 professions: the marriage and family therapists, clinical social workers, and professional clinical counselors. And then also we develop the LMFT clinical and the LEP standard written. So what we are looking at here are questions that we looked through that would help OPES in doing a diff analysis. And that's where I kind of want the committee to look over to see if there's any suggestions or thoughts on that. What we are hoping is that the committee will look at the questions, we can move forward with them, and we want to try to get this it will be a voluntary survey. And we're assuming that it's going to be presented to candidates when they are signing up for the exams, not during the exam time. So we have to work out the technicalities of how we're going to do that. But definitely this information is voluntary and it's going to be confidential. But I think it's going to definitely assist us in, moving forward with evaluating our exams. I think it's something that we need to do. At the same time, I think in all our discussions here, we really need to consider the consumer protection, but understanding that, the tests may be providing unnecessary barriers. And I think this will help us out a lot. So those are the questions on attachment A. I don't know if there will be any comments. Hopefully there will, but really it's pretty basic data, asking about qualifying degrees, where if you got your degree on an online institution, because that's something that's a more brick or mortar or online institution, that's something that we're interested in too. That's kind of the upstream factors that might come into play. How you prepared for the exams? Did you have the ability to, do preparation materials or programs? Did you use those, or looking at that, maybe you didn't have the ability to? We're looking at languages spoken and, basically race and ethnicity and gender and age. So it's really 9 basic questions that we're trying to get, but I think we worked with OPS to design those questions. And so hopefully that will allow us to delve more into our exams and perform these diff analysis. So I'd open it up for comments or suggestions on the attachment.
Thank you, Steve. Board members, do you have any questions or comments on the demographic survey. Dr. Walker.
Thank you. Again, I am reacting. I just want to say that I appreciate you somewhat pulling together the context of the previous presentation to what you're presenting to us now as relates to a DIF analysis, or DIF, if you will. So thank you. Just trying to get the context and everything in order here in my mind. Otherwise, I don't understand the relationship between the previous presentation and how we're working with OPES to address issues and concerns and validity and biases on, for our consumers of the test exams right now. And so I hope that makes a little sense. But kind of, I'm just thanking you for kind of pulling it together for me in my mind.
Okay. Check and see if there's any other comments from board members. Right. Eleanor.
I have a comment.
Sure.
So I know I guess I probably needed to get more information why, getting the voluntary demographics, but I think for me, it's basically getting to the point, like, why are people not passing? And I almost feel like there needs to be more of an in-depth study as far as, what else is there? I mean, I think of other things besides, as far as ethnicity, I was thinking there's people that have multiple ethnicity, right? Multiple. Maybe adding that. Also, I think of other things as far as, what responsibility do people have? Are they care providers? Are they, parents? Are they taking care of their older, their own parents? What generation are they? Are they first generation? Their status? I think these are all some other, just to name a few factors that could contribute. But that's why I'm saying I feel like, besides just demographics, I feel like ideally, if, we have our students do project thesis, I feel like there's so much more that needs to be looked into it. And I know lots of research has shown, but anyway, that's just some thoughts.
And just to kind of comment on that, this is just for exams. It's the whole, as we're looking, it's the whole process of education and supervision and all the other things, the hoops you have to jump through to get licensed. And I think what you're kind of, when you're mentioning those things, what I'm envisioning is this is helping us out looking at exams to kind of look at that part. But part of this committee, and that's why we're changing it to this workforce development, is really looking for the licensure process, because that's what we are responsible for the consumer protection. How do you get through that licensure process? And I think I can see surveys later on to kind of look at where people are, having difficulties getting through that process. Is it you can't get your supervision within 6 years because you're, why is that? Is it because you don't have the time to actually be able to, you have to actually have a full-time job while you're getting your supervision? Or, looking at those factors so we can get a whole picture of what is preventing people from making it through the licensure process, which is that's kind of what we have control of. But I think that's going to really come into various other discussions too, just to kind of highlight that later on. So.
Okay. So Steve, today, are you looking for suggestions on or feedback on these particular questions, or?
Yeah, just this particular questions, if kind of getting your basically approval to move forward with doing a voluntary demographic survey for our exams is really looking at that. And if there's any suggestions or comments on the questions, that would be good too.
Okay. My screen went black on the item itself, so I apologize. I can't answer this question for myself, but can you share a little bit more about kind of how these were pulled together and who else is using, what are we relying on for picking these questions over others? Oh, Steve.
Wow, I can't believe I just did that. It's been so long. And excuse me, it sounds like my dog's about to bark. We worked with OPS, and these were questions that they identified that would help them to perform a diff analysis. It looks like they're somewhat in line with the demographic surveys that's done by HCI. So they're similar on the ethnicity questions and such. And that's where we kind of derive them from, so. Is there any questions?
Steve, the only this is Justin Huff. The only recommendation that I would have, because you already have, as member Uribe pointed out, there's already the option to select multiple racial ethnic groups. I would recommend, per the gender research, that you allow a select all that apply for the gender question as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Apologies for my computer went a little haywire right there. So Justin, I missed your comments, but I'm sure they were great.
They were really good, but just to recommend select all that apply option for the gender question.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions or feedback from board members? I would say for me personally, sort of the survey and demographic data collection is not really my area of expertise. So would rely on the feedback of fellow board members who have certainly an expertise in this area. Are there any other comments to share? Okay. Great, thank you, Steve. We will go to comments from the public.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm opening up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to comment, you may either raise your hand or type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. I do see Ben has made a request for comment, so one moment, Ben. All right, Ben, I'm going to come back to you because for some reason my computer is not allowing me to get to you. So I'm going to go to Kimberly Miller. Her hand is up. Kimberly, you should be able to unmute. There you go.
Hi. I just have one question for Steve. So like the ASWB exam that the survey that they sent was in Likert scale, 5-point Likert scale. So if you're doing this data, are you going to give them the consumer or give us test takers the leeway or room to make comments and elaborate further on to what is going on? Because there's not only race, there's age, there's other factors, and that would be very helpful to, like you said, you want to know what profession or what area they're actually working in, like what setting, what is their role, all these different things. Will we be able to do that?
The questions I'm trying to figure out how to answer. We're not going to really do settings or that. We hadn't discussed that really. I don't know if that's something that we would want to add onto these questions. I don't know if the committee thinks that's valuable or not.
All right, the next comment is from Ben. And Ben, you should be able to unmute.
Thank you, Ben Caldwell, MFT. I won't talk so fast this time. A couple of questions about context here that, Steve, you may be able to answer. I'm curious about some of the phrasing in this agenda item. Is the reason that OPES has not engaged in diff analysis of BBS exams a practice that's expected under testing industry standards precisely because it's considered a foundational protection of fairness, is because the board hasn't asked for it? I'm just wondering whether you can clarify whose responsibility it is to ensure that the testing program is fair, equitable, and operated in accordance with industry norms. I know that legally the board can't mandate the collection of demographic data as part of the exam process, but to my knowledge, there's never been a statutory impediment to gathering that data on a voluntary basis. And then lastly, because it's related to the relevant statistical analysis here, I would just call out that some of what you heard related to differential test functioning analysis is not consistent with industry standards. Those standards explicitly recognize that you can have meaningful bias in the form of differential test functioning, even in the absence of statistically significant diff, if enough items sort of lean a little bit in the same direction. And a responsible exam developer should really be testing for both of those. The questions proposed here in the survey are fine with me, pending the suggestion that Board Member Huft raised. I would just make sure to say that because of the possibility of stereotype threat, we want to make sure that we're presenting these questions after the exam and not before. Thank you.
All right, and next we have Kathy Atkins. Kathy, you should be able to unmute.
Hi, this is Kathy Atkins with CAMPT. I am not a statistician, or as one of the committee members said earlier, this is definitely not my field of expertise, the survey data collection. But I was wondering, when you're looking at it, if in the questions, if there's something related to, and I don't know what the terminology will be, but finance or economic status or background. The reason I ask is related to what kinds of pre-testing access they have to different either courses or what have you before they take the exam. Again, I don't know if that's something that the board would consider relevant, but I have heard a lot about that. So I was curious if that's worth considering and or how you would even phrase it. And then also, when this comes out, just encouraging the board to, utilize the associations as best of their ability to, get some of this data out. I know it's there are the legal impediments to requiring its collection, but we want to help in any way we can. So thank you.
All right, I see no further requests for comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Do you want just to really, I can respond to Ben. Yeah, we just never asked for this. OPES, we are the ones that kind of are really in charge of the whole exams, and we've never asked for a diff analysis. So this is our first attempt. And I think one of our hesitation has always been it's asking for demographic surveys or demographic information. So, but this is our first stab at it. Still going to be voluntary, confidential. The idea of, I think what I would prefer what we're trying to do is even get this before people enter into the exam site, because I know I don't want to add additional anxiety onto somebody when they're taking the exam. And additionally, I think when you If you do it after the exam, if you're passing, we're probably not going to get a lot of people that are going to sit around and do an exam, and we can't make it mandatory. So we have to catch it on the forefront. And I think we'll get better stats and data that way. And then for the, Kathy, what you're mentioning, we do ask the question, did you utilize test preparation materials or programs to prepare for the exam? It's not directly going to pull out the information that you're asking about, but you might be able to tease something out of that. So,
Steve, I appreciate the information there. I'm not quite sure how I feel about this notion that OPES won't do something unless we ask for it, but how do we know to ask for it? Like, if I'm not a statistician, so I don't know as board members that, that we should ask for this kind of analysis or this kind of data collection. And so I'm just kind of trying to mull that in my head right now, but my initial reaction is they're the survey experts, and shouldn't they be suggesting like the best survey analysis available to us rather than us having to ask for it? So it's just kind of an interesting observation, I guess.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess it's just not, it really hasn't been on both of our minds really until the ASWB exam. So I know definitely for myself and staff, it's something that we never considered. And I think when, as you can see, OPS is definitely seeing the value in this and supporting this. So, I think it was just something that we maybe weren't thinking about at the time. So, but we see the value in it now.
Sure. I guess it just still surprises me that this wasn't an issue that they saw coming sooner, but we're here now. Any other questions from board members? Dr. Walker.
Thank you. I just want to say, I'm trying to carefully craft my wording here, but the relationship between OPES and the board is very important, valuable, critical, and it sounds like it's almost like a us versus them conversation going on right now, and I don't want that to be my takeaway. I can't speak from anyone else, but I appreciate everyone that attends our board meetings, that works closely with us in our licensure processing, and that we're coming together to work in the best interest of the consumers and the best interest of the test takers and the best interest of all of us working together, hopefully with the same intention in mind, which is to do best by them and to do the best that we can do in the roles that we're in. So I just want to say, I just kind of feel a little tension there. And it is what it is. But for me personally, I don't want that to be my takeaway. And I am supportive of us coming together as stakeholders, as parties on whatever side it is or whatever agency we're with, but we're coming here together to do the best work that we can do. And so I just want to say that I appreciate all of us coming forward today with presentations, with additional information, with formulating questions, with looking at and having a solution-based conversation. So I just want to say that. And Steve, if there's anything that you can do to continue to foster and cultivate meaningful conversations with all of these parties and entities, that would be greatly appreciated, because I know that is indeed our intentions as board members and you in your role to come together and work together.
Thank you very much for bringing that up. Yeah, I mean, OPS, I view them, we are one team. I mean, in the exam development and in, furthering public protection. So we are a team. That's the way I view it. And they are very good at communicating, consulting, working with us. So thank you I appreciate that. That was very poignant. So, and speaking of that, actually, we have one more public comment. Heidi didn't get a chance to speak. after the presentation. So I think Heidi, you had something to say?
Hi, this is Heidi Linser, Chief of OPS. Thank you, Steve, for giving me a moment to speak. Yes, I appreciate all the work that the committee is doing, talking about these issues. Just wanted to clarify that OPS has been well aware of diff analysis. We have been unable to perform diff analysis due to the lack of data, as you understand. And the issue has been a longstanding policy of DCA and there are some legal statutes that say that to collect demographic data, you have to have a valid reason, and that was interpreted as we didn't have the valid reason, and it had to be voluntary. That's true. And in the past, we have been told, from legal authorities that we weren't able to collect this data. Recently, that statute has been re-looked at and reevaluated, and we have been encouraging that. And that's why in the memo, we said that boards should ask for diff analysis, and that's why we're encouraging it.
Thank you. Your comments are very helpful and well noted, and thank you, Dr. Walker, for refocusing all of us on the end goal and working together to better public protection. So, are there any other comments we need to make on this item? Okay, seeing none. Thank you. I think we are moving on now to item 9, presentation on barriers to licensure by the California Alliance of Child and Family Services. And Steve, are you making an introduction?
Sure, just a quick introduction. Adrian Shilton and Paige Clark are here to speak with us. They had, in August of 2023, they put out a paper. It was entitled Addressing Disparities in the Clinical Exam Rates for Behavioral Health. I've put that as an attachment. What I really liked about the paper were the actual items they had for moving forward and what we can do. And so I kind of wanted to bring them here today to kind of talk about their ideas on how we can maybe looking at reducing barriers, helping out with the workforce and such. I mean, as we stand right now, we really do have to, I think as a board, when we're talking about workforce, we need more data determining why, HCI is doing a good job to figure out where, we have clinicians and where they are located and access and such. There's a lot more study to do on that, but I think some of the things that Paige and Adrian will bring up will help us to get, further our goals here in the committee. So they have a short presentation, and I think they'll be here for questions. So you guys can take it away.
Thank you, Steve, for the introduction, and thank you to the board for having us here. Today, my name is Paige Clark from the California Alliance of Child and Family Services, and I will pass it over to Adrian to introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for having us. Adrian Shilton with the California Alliance of Child and Family Services.
Great. So as Steve mentioned, we are here today to share about our work on identifying barriers to licensure and recommendations from our recent report. The Alliance proudly represents over 160 community-based organizations serving children and families. And I want to first thank our providers who have really been leaders in sounding the alarms around these barriers that exist for clinicians of color. Next slide, please. Thank you. Our members employ a variety of behavioral health and social service professionals, and we've been working on efforts to retain and expand the workforce. And in our exploration of issues facing the workforce, we have been really alarmed at the lack of diversity across race and ethnicity lines in these professions. We are well aware that professionals do not reflect our population and the populations that we're serving. For example, as African Americans and Latinos are significantly underrepresented among the professions listed here on your screen. So even though communities of color will make up a large percentage of California's population by 2030, we have seen their representation in the health workforce and the educational pipeline is nowhere near that level. And we've identified that urgent action is needed to better support people of color who seek to enter or grow and continue their career in these professions. So I will pass it over to Adrian to highlight some data on one step in the licensing process where we really see these inequities play out.
Thanks, Paige. We can go to the next slide. So the Alliance's journey in this endeavor really started when the Association of Social Work Boards published this 2022 exam pass rate analysis, which includes the data on the population and performance of test takers taking the various exams that are administered by the ASWB. And so the data provided specifically about those seeking licensure in social work really speaks to the disparate outcomes for test takers based on race, on age, and primary language as well. So the data that's presented here on this slide shows, that BIPOC clinicians are passing at sometimes half of the rate of their white peers. And just to highlight one data point in particular here, 89.9% of white test takers in California passed the clinical exam on their first time, while 54.4% of Black test takers in California passed on their first time during that same period, 2018 to 2021. So on the next slide, we were very alarmed to see this, although not necessarily surprised, and really wanted to dig into these issues further, as we didn't want to assume that the test is the only cause of the disparity. That did seem to us kind of an oversimplification of all of the issues. So what we did, the Alliance, is pulled together some small focus groups of our members and their clinical staff to talk through these issues, to examine them, and to talk about the variety of barriers that exist on the pathway to licensure. And so here, on this slide, this is a quote from one of our members in the focus group, which I think, is really powerful. I'm just going to read it. People usually go through the licensure process when they are making the lowest salary they'll ever make, because it's the beginning of their careers, even more difficult to pay exorbitant testing and retesting fees. So considering, the dire shortage of workers that we have in the public behavioral health field, we're always looking at what are the urgent actions that are needed to ensure that our state can meet the growing demand, to offer the quality services that are needed, and maintain that access to the comprehensive range of care that's needed, and have a diverse and inclusive workforce. So on the next slide, I'm just going to highlight some of these barriers briefly, because what I really want to focus on for this presentation is our recommendations. So we've summarized in our report kind of the primary barriers that are, together with our members, we've identified, including prohibitive testing and retesting costs. That was related to the quote on the last slide. So many clinicians in our focus groups highlighted the exorbitant costs associated with licensure. So that's definitely one barrier. Access to test examination resources. So for many potential licensees, the process to prepare for the required exams in their discipline is lengthy, time intensive, and expensive. There are also differences in licensing between states. So for example, some of the members, in our focus groups, there are applicants who began their licensing process in another state and then coming to California need to take, several, sometimes, many additional California specific courses when they're eligible for licensure. So that was something else that was identified. There's also, this was interesting to me. I was not aware of this prior to kind of digging into the issues, but really seems to be a burdensome and expensive process to request language accommodations. So for test takers who require a language accommodation on a BBS exam, they have to request accommodation and allow up to 90 days for this request to be processed. And there are also additional fees associated with this. So that also came up as a significant barrier. And then, of course, on the issue around supervision and unpaid internships and who really can take advantage of those and who cannot. So that came up again and again with our members. And so, as we were, digging into these barriers, we really also wanted to take a look at ideas that we should explore either through policy, either through legislative advocacy or other administrative advocacy. And that's really the heart of our report that we want to talk about today. And Paige is going to review some of those recommendations with you next.
Thanks, Adrienne. We can go to the next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. So as Adrienne mentioned, we have been working with our members, collaborating with partners, many of whom are in the virtual room today, to develop several recommendations. And I want to share the caveat that we could really dive into any of these recommendations for the entirety of a meeting. So please take a look at the report, and we hope this is only the beginning of this conversation. But I'm going to highlight a few of our recommendations for you all today. First and foremost, we strongly recommend reconsidering the connection between licensing exams and professional competency and urge the board to consider whether the use of a standardized exam could be replaced altogether by measures that may be more accurate and reliable at predicting clinician competency and safety. The issue with the current form of a standardized test, which we've talked about in the previous presentation, is there's quite limited evidence that written exams accurately measure competence, and there are other avenues to explore to assess applicants, such as oral exams, client feedback, etc. Just to highlight something that came out of the focus groups is our members really shared countless stories of professionals that have been working in the field that have impressive track records of providing client-centered, trauma-informed care, but have been limited and ultimately discouraged from pursuing licensure due to multiple attempts to pass the clinical exam. So in light of the workforce issues, how can we ensure that those folks can continue to serve communities and provide really vital services? Next, as Adrienne mentioned, there is an extremely high financial cost to go through the licensure process. So we would recommend increasing access to free exam prep materials, waiving test registration fees for retesting. So folks that have already paid once should not be burdened by not passing the exam and having to pay again for the test, and considering other forms of financial aid for test takers. Next, one interesting part of the data that we saw from ASWB is that the testing disparities don't look the same at all schools. So some schools are seeing that their test takers are passing at very different rates than other schools. So we think that a very important piece of this puzzle is to increase opportunities for accessible and affordable, high quality training, professional collaboration, and peer learning to ensure that everyone has access to these really important opportunities to prepare them for licensure and their career on the whole, regardless of what their school can provide. And then 2 more recommendations that I wanted to highlight. First, we learned of some significant barriers in the licensure process for those who are missing a single course in their degree program. In our focus groups, we were disheartened to learn about situations in which a candidate who had a master's degree in their discipline was missing a single course, and rather than being allowed to make up that course, was told that the course had to be part of the degree program and that the recommendation would be to get an entirely new degree in order to be eligible. As we all know, graduate education is prohibitively expensive, and this candidate was unable to complete a new program and therefore complete their licensure. So we highly recommend exploring alternate pathways to licensure for those who may be missing a single course. And we think that's a really critical piece to creating a more equitable process. The last recommendation that I wanted to share that pairs nicely with the conversation preceding this is the ASWB data that was released in the fall is really only the beginning of the conversation regarding test pass rates and the inequities that exist in the licensing process. So we hope and urge folks to make this data available on an annual basis for all exams so we can measure our progress in reducing these barriers for candidates of color. So in closing, just wanted to thank the board again for their attention to these ongoing issues and thank our partners and members work continuing digging into this. We hope that this is an urgent priority for us all, not only because of the workforce issues that hinder our ability to provide services to Californians, but also for the ways structural racism is persisting in our field and really must be addressed. So that is all we have. Thank you all.
Thank you for the great presentation. I will check in with board members to see if we have any questions to start the conversation. Dr. Walker.
Yes, agreed. Great conversation, great presentation. They've all been just really fluid today. I appreciate you both for being here. And I think you've just really started the conversation when we, again, bring forth solutions and possibilities and recommendations such as you have done, really jumpstarts the conversation. So I'm really curious to know and understanding the role of the BBS, where we're going from here, because I think there are some things that you brought forward today in regards to the barriers to licensure that don't require a whole bunch of bureaucracy. It's just like there are things that we can do now. And I think those things that we can do sooner rather than later should be on the table right now. So I appreciate your presentation again. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Walker. Great comments. Any other comments from board members? Okay, let's.
I wanted to just say that I was reading through their kind of the issues, and I felt like there was a lot of great suggestions, especially to help make it more equitable for all. And I think one of the ones that's, I was kind of following along. I'm like, check. But even with the language, I don't know if there's a way we could just put it automatically in our process. Hey, choose the language and it's just integrated. If you need it, use it. So anyway, I like the start of this conversation, and I look forward to hearing more about it.
Great. I think we'll go ahead and go to any questions or comments from the public.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've opened up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to comment, you may either type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of the screen or simply raise your hand. We are displaying instructions and we'll give you a moment. I do see Marika Collins with her hand up. So Marika, you should be able to unmute.
Wonderful, thank you. Again, my name is Marika Collins. I'm with Judy Hirsch Mental Health Services. I'm based in LA County. I want to first thank Dr. Walker for appreciating the work and really the lifting up the desire for what we can do in the now. We are struggling as a community-based organization, and I think I can speak on behalf of other sister agencies across the state when I tell you that beyond the workforce shortage, you know, we can talk about the struggles of an agency, but putting those aside to hire is the struggles of our community members, particularly communities of color, African American communities, and I will also call out communities of Native Americans who often, way too often get overlooked. And as an agency that's focused on suicide prevention, I will let you know that the rates of suicide and suicide attempts among youth, particularly among those marginalized communities of BIPOC, we cannot let this issue go unaddressed. We need to figure out a way to make these exams not a barrier, but just part of the process in order for them to get them on the street, in the homes, in the community, serving these at-risk, vulnerable communities. We did participate in one of those groups that Adrian or Paige mentioned in terms of bringing our clinical staff together with boots on the ground to really share their experiences. I'm a policy person, so I can't speak to it, but what they really did raise were, you know, these issues around, you know, taking an exam that was really focused on hospital-based medical model, private practice type of oriented questions, and felt less so focused on
15 seconds.
Street-based care. So I could go on and on, but I really just want to thank you for giving attention to this important issue and hope you'll look for the low-hanging fruit as well as longer-term solutions. Thank you so much.
All right, next we have a request for comment from Marian Wise. Marian, you should be able to unmute.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Yes, my name's Marian. I'm an LCSW. I've been an LCSW in San Francisco for 2 years, and I'm a clinical director at a CBO. And previous to that, I was a LCSW for 10 years in New York State. So I have a little different background. And I think I have like a couple of just real nitty-gritty things that have come up in terms of barriers to licensure, and that is related to how clinicians can track their clinical hours. First being that if they work more than 10 clinical hours in a week, they have to have more than 1 unit of supervision that week. And that's not anything that I've experienced in other states that I've worked in. 1 hour of clinical supervision a week is the industry standard. The clinicians are allowed to bill for all of their services. So if they're doing more than 10 hours of clinical work, and they have 1 hour of supervision, why is it that they can't count the rest of their clinical work toward their licensure, right? And as you can guess, this obviously can, cause all sorts of challenges for them and for the agencies as well, right? As we our goal is always to meet the clinical needs of our team. And the other one is that there's this requirement that clinicians have a certain number of weeks of clinical work that they do and weeks of supervision. That makes sense. That's like other states I've worked in as well. But here, if you don't get that supervision that same week, then you can't count any of the work that you do that week. And obviously, the goal is always to provide the supervision every week. But what I've seen happen is someone gets sick, and then suddenly the clinician can't count the work they did just because of one little, I got sick the day of their meeting. So just appreciate you taking these things into consideration.
All right, our next request for comment is from Ben Caldwell. And Ben, you should be able to unmute.
Thank you, Ben Caldwell, MFT. And I want to start by saying thanks to Ms. Clark, Ms. Shilton. This was a fantastic presentation. I really appreciate your emphasis on solutions and the wide range of steps that can be taken. Echoing what the prior commenter had said too, specifically about low-hanging fruit, I hope that in discussion of potential solutions at the board level here, that we don't let the sort of enormity of the larger challenge, that is to create equity throughout the licensing and professional development process, prevent the board from taking smaller, more immediate steps where there is opportunity to do so. We shouldn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. There will be things that emerge, I imagine, pretty quickly as potential solutions that don't entirely solve the problem, but would represent meaningful steps in the right direction. And so I hope that we are all able to work collaboratively and with some urgency to start tackling what is admittedly a large and critical task. Thank you.
All right, our next request for comment is from Rebecca Gonzalez. Rebecca, you should be able to unmute.
Thank you, Rebecca Gonzalez with the National Association of Social Workers, California chapter. I would like to also thank the California Alliance for this excellent report and also the variety of solutions that they presented to help with the workforce challenges, especially with a culturally diverse workforce that we really need in order to provide effective mental health services. And I also do want to point out that the report does specifically call out the testing issue. And in fact, quoting from the report, it says, historically, standardized testing has continued to reinforce structural and systemic racism within education and employment spaces. So I want to thank them for calling that out. I want to thank them for their other solutions, and I hope we can work on ways to decrease barriers. Thank you.
Our next comment is from Kathy Atkins. Kathy, you should be able to unmute.
Hi, Kathy Atkins from CAMPT. I want to echo lots of the comments so far, expressing appreciation to all the work done here. Especially enlightening to me was just the across the board suggestions, not frankly just under the Board of Behavioral Sciences, but other stakeholders and entities that could be rolling up their sleeves to help with this ongoing issue. I think it'd be great to possibly send out this report as well as some of the recommendations, not just to the associations, but other stakeholders, consortia, if they have not been already, or schools. Like I said, it seems like there's not just low-hanging fruit, but areas that can be improved that could potentially fall under the BBS, but also can be improved by other stakeholders. So I encourage sending this report out with the findings and suggestions as we all take a part in increasing and advocating on this issue. Thank you.
All right, our next comment is from Kimberly Miller. Kimberly, you should be able to unmute.
Hi, I'm Kimberly Miller. I'm MSW, ACSW. I want to say thank you to Paige Clark and Adrian Shilton for bringing this conversation out, because this does hit a lot of the points that I don't have enough time to tell everybody personal experiences or other friends' experiences, but Marion Wise actually really hit it, because I've worked with these agencies when I worked in the jail. And basically we did not have time. It was very difficult in a jail setting to do release planning to get people services out to like Didi Hirsch and other places. And the test, we've all kind of said, doesn't align with what a lot of our different roles are. And then sometimes it's kind of like, oh, yay, here comes help. So we're utilized from the beginning that we get there, within the supervision, to not really get a lot out of it, because, like, for instance, my role was a release planner, and MSWs can do that. But we had licensed people that were there that were doing the same work that I was doing. And so how is that valid, when they decide to say, well, you've hit your 6-year limit and now you're going to be demoted or fired? Because if there's not a position, you're fired. So I kind of think Marion was hitting on, that's the low-hanging fruit, is that there's a lot of people, again, who have lost jobs and have been taken away from the workforce, and we need to be there.
I'm sorry, your time is up. Our next request for comment is from Peggy Zerdev. And Peggy, you should be able to unmute. And Peggy, you're unmuted.
Thank you. Very quickly, I was just wondering if there were any findings involving the current submittal process for approval to sit for the exam that might be negatively impacting applicants that are the BIPOC, and such as the current wait time. And was there anything that was found in particular to that?
All right, this is a moderator. I see no further requests for comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Thank you for the really robust and helpful input through the public comments. And I don't know if any board members want to add anything, or staff, if there's any additional information you want to provide following public comment.
Just really quick, a lot of the things that were brought up as suggestions, as you can see, we've kind of incorporated some of those for future discussions in the first part, where we're going over the the next steps for the licensing committee. So it's kind of cool. We will be addressing some of those ideas that were brought up. So
great, thank you. Any other final comments from board members? Okay, just thank all of our presenters today for all of the helpful information and great discussion with the board. I think this moves us on to item 10, suggestions for future agenda items. Do we have any board members requesting any future agenda items? Seeing none. Do we have any members of the public suggesting a future agenda item?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm opening up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to comment on this agenda item, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, or simply raise your hand. We are displaying instructions and we'll give you a moment. All right, I see no requests for comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, moving on to item 11, public comments for items not on the agenda. As a reminder, the board may not discuss or take action on any matter raised during this public comment section, except to decide whether to place the matter on the agenda of a future meeting. Do any board members have comments for items not on the agenda? Seeing none.
I kind of had a comment. I wanted to know if you suggest something for a future board item, how long do they kind of does it take to maybe bring that up or revisit it?
I think I will answer that. Yeah.
Yeah. So what we do is we'll take those future agenda items, we'll discuss with the board president and to see how we can fit that in, because we have to take in what we do have to take into consideration is current projects that we're working on and current committee stuff that we're working on, and seeing if we actually have the capacity, and then we'll try to fit it in, to that. So it's kind of unknown as to how long that would take. So if that makes sense, hopefully.
Do we have any members of the, oh, sorry, Eleanor, did you have more?
No, I just said thank you.
Okay, thanks. Do we have any members of the public with comments for items not on the agenda?
I'm sorry, before you go on, can I follow up on that last
Of
question
course.
and response? Steve, would it be possible, because it seems like not giving an answer is not the best answer, because we can at least, we should be able to provide some kind of time frame, because if you work with the board president, you at least can come back to the next meeting with some kind of idea of whether it might move forward quickly, or it may be, or it's not an easy board request for an agenda item to respond to within the 6 months period or a year. It's like you should be able to give us some kind of timeline, if you will. She should be able to get some kind of response to that.
I think what we would usually do is contact if somebody does do a future agenda item, we'll discuss it, and then definitely we would reach out back to the person who actually gave that suggestion and talk with them to say, hey, sometimes when they're mentioned, we already know that this is going to be discussed in a certain manner in another meeting. So, but yeah, we would reach out to the actual suggestor to consult with them. So,
well, great. That's at least some touch point of communication. That's should be expected. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Is there a time frame that you would reach back out to them to let them know, like say within the month, with 3 months, just out of curiosity?
Once we had a chance to discuss with the board president and figure it out, we could. It's kind of up in the air. A week, 2 weeks. It would be. I would try to do it as soon as possible. So. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Again, let me jump in and help out with that then, because I know you meet regularly with the board president. Okay. Mm-hmm. So if you have a conversation with him, whenever that regular meeting is, I'm sure that you're likely to bring this up. So that's not within, yeah. So I think that's what she's asking. So at least you can let her know, well, I spoke to the board president during our weekly meeting, and we're going to discuss this later at a different time, and then I'll get back to you. Or we did discuss it, and here's my response for you right now. It shouldn't.
Yeah, I'm not trying to, but like if I don't for some reason have a meeting with the board president in a month, then it would be a month. But if it's next week, I'll talk to you next week. That's why I'm not trying to be, elusive, but. How about after we talk with the board president, I would get back to you.
Or even before then, because a response, I'm sorry, Eleanor, a response would be, I am not able to communicate with the board president in a timely manner, if it's a month or something like that. At least keep her in the loop. So that's all I'm suggesting. That's just.
I get it. Right? No, that makes a proper communication. No, that's good.
Yeah.
Okay. I would say at least before the next meeting, right?
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
Great. We will move on to any members of the public that have comments for items not on the agenda.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've opened up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to comment, you may either raise your hand or type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. And I do see that we have Lisa Winninger requesting to make a comment. So one moment, and I'll find her in my list. All right, so Lisa Winninger, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hello, I hope I just clicked the right button. My name is
Lisa
Winninger. Great, I'm at LPCC. I am commenting to offer an opportunity for education for this committee. I am going to unfortunately repeat what was said, which is considered a microaggression. The phrase low-hanging fruit was repeated by many participants today, and I just wanted to raise awareness that this can be considered a harmful phrase because it references lynching. And you may please Google this to learn more about the history. There is a song from Billie Holiday, Strange Fruit, which it references. So I just wanted to try to bring awareness to this, please. Thank you.
All right, this is the moderator. I see no further requests for comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, and that brings us to item 12, adjournment. Thank you for everyone participating today. And as a reminder, our next board meeting will be on November 16th and 17th in Sacramento. We hope to see you again. And the meeting is adjourned at 11:40 a.m. Thank you.